Yeah, since we are running behind schedule, if we could please settle down. We have with us Field Marshal Sarath Fonseka. Now, since yesterday we have heard various references to the rise of terrorism as a parallel power, so to say, and the never-ending war on terror. If there's one war on terror which has been decisively fought and won, it is in Sri Lanka. And Field Marshal Fonseka, he was the person who led the Sri Lankan army. To him goes the credit of destroying one of the best organized, well-armed, well-funded terrorist organizations in the world, and that's the LTTE. Since then, of course, Sri Lanka has undergone a whole process of settling down politically, making peace internally, and building on that peace and trying to reap the dividends of peace. And General Fonseka, who's the first Sri Lankan general to be named Field Marshal, he has shifted from the barracks to the world of politics. He's the regional development minister there now. So we will hear him out on on his contribution to securing peace and sort of reinstating Sri Lanka's position in the region. And after that, we'll take a couple of questions related to Sri Lanka, India, and security issues in Sri Lanka. We will keep it tight because he has a flight to catch. Thank you. Over to you, Field Marshal.
Good afternoon. Director of our Research Foundation, Your Excellencies, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. New normal, multipolarity with multilateralism. To be very frank, I am not a specialist or expert on the geopolitical issues. Therefore, when I got the topic, I had to consult all the experts in my country. Because I was had only a limited knowledge on military, especially counter-terrorism. So they have helped me to prepare my speech today. Hopefully, if it doesn't go well, don't blame me, blame the experts in my country. If we do well, you can give me a little bit of credit for bringing the ideas here. Anyway, thank you very much for allowing me to come here and take your time and speak on this very important issue, which is of utmost importance regionally and also globally. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the global political and economic architecture has been undergirded largely by one superpower. We set the stage for an unprecedented period of globalization managed through multilateralism, lateral institutions and actors. Now that unipolar moment is giving way to an era of diffuse powers, with countries like the US, China, and Russia each bearing considerable disruptive capabilities, each is struggling to stitch together new norms and rules for these rapidly changing times. This phase, the beginning of which was marked by the global financial crisis in 2008 and characterized by America's two bruising wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, has seen a vacuum emerge. many are seeking to fill it. Most determinedly China, but with a pushback from Japan and India. Separately, IS and radical energies in the Middle East also seek to grab new space. Russia has chosen this very moment to signal its ability to muddy the Eurasian fields and intervene in the Middle East. The fact is there is not enough room to accommodate all of these ambitions. In this context of macro-convergence and limited micro-convergence, a framework for regulating power in the Indian Ocean and beyond is required. Of course, such a framework must be flexible enough to respond to strategic changes. For example, if unexpectedly fast Indian growth shifts the regional balance of power, it must also effectively constrain, channel, and process the exercise of power. Such a framework will need to maintain and uphold the rules-based international order and the principles that undergird them. It is in this very order that has so successfully prevented the global conflict since the Second World War, provided a sense of security for millions of people living in small states such as Sri Lanka, and perhaps most importantly providing the bedrock for our unprecedented collective economic prosperity. Now let me acquaint you with a short history of Sri Lanka and geopolitics. Sri Lanka's geopolitical location consists of three vital geopolitical dimensions: its contiguity to the Indian subcontinent, which affected the civilization, its equidistant position from between East Asia and East Africa, which overlaps the whole region, and its situation astride the sea lane linking East and West makes it the meeting ground of the world. The wide arc of the region thus became an area of influence for Sri Lanka. Especially in the first millennium, Sri Lanka needed to work with global interest while pursuing its national interest and need to develop its soft power geopolitics as economically Sri Lanka is dependent on international financial agencies and the rich states, but Sri Lanka manages its own resources, natural or human. As Sri Lanka is a geopolitically small state, Sri Lanka is not a dominant destination of FDI. Geoculturally, Sri Lanka is not a member of a large civilization group. Geopolitically, Sri Lanka is located within the Indian sphere of influence. Sri Lanka is an integral part of Indian security strategy. Located strategically in the Indian Ocean, located next to the most important international maritime shipping lane, Sri Lanka is an integral part of Chinese geopolitical strategy of string of pearls. The geopolitical choice of Sri Lanka depends on the following factors. A, be part of an anti-West camp, potentially enemies the US and the West. B, be part of Chinese geopolitical strategy for the Indian Ocean, potential enemies India. C, be an integral part of Indian geopolitical strategy, potential enemy is China. Any one of these models could make Sri Lanka geopolitically vulnerable as supporting one state against the other. Security of shipping lanes is a common denominator of the geopolitical strategy of the US or West and China. Be an active agent of Indian Ocean geopolitical security. No potential enemies but friends of all. This can be done without challenging national security strategy of India. Sri Lanka needs to take the pro-action and inform all the major geopolitical players of its position. There are no permanent friends or enemies in geopolitics, only national interest. In the past, when Sri Lankan actions became detrimental to the Western and Indian geopolitical interest, they did not hesitate to pressurize, influence, and even intervene. Likelihood of this happening again is not real. In the past, Sri Lanka has also practiced the policy of friendly relations with all states, India, China, and the United States and West. This has been the most beneficial to Sri Lanka with least negative consequences. Sri Lanka is at a defining moment in its history. A new government has taken over the power in early 2015 to run the state with new vision and shared political ideology of two main political parties, United National Party and Sri Lanka Freedom Party. The end of Sri Lanka's 32-year-old conflict has opened the possibility of a new period of sustained peace and prosperity. Despite the conflict, the 2004 tsunami, and the impact of the global recession, the country has achieved middle-income status. With a land area of 65,610 square kilometers and a population of 20.3 million, Sri Lanka achieved a score of 0.757 in 2014 from 0.679 in 2000 on the 2015 Human Development Index, ranking 73rd out of 187 countries, the highest in South Asia. The world average in 2014 is 0.711, and South Asia average at 0.607. Noting the positive relationship between work and human development, the HDR said most Sri Lankan workers in the formal sector retire in their 60s, and a relatively small fraction are employed part or full-time. But casual workers and self-employed workers tend to keep their full-time jobs for many more years. Sri Lanka has integrated human resources and employment strategies in its National Human Resources and Employment Strategy, which began in 2014, to reduce unemployment and create more work opportunities. In Sri Lanka, annual job growth is 12%. Sri Lanka's neighbor India is ranked 130th in the medium development countries, along with Bhutan at 132, Maldives at 104, Bangladesh ranked 142 under lower development countries, Nepal is ranked at 145, and Afghanistan at 174, Pakistan at 147. Sri Lanka was well positioned to achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. Sri Lanka has a recorded history of over 2,500 years, with diplomatic ties and trade with other countries in the world. For the most part, ancient Sri Lanka was ruled by kings with a self-sufficient village-based economic system. The country boasts of irrigation work that compare with the most modern in terms of scientific construction and hospitals that predate the birth of Western medicine. Sri Lanka was later colonized by the British and remained so until gaining independence in 1948. Economically, agriculture, in particular, paddy and chaina cultivation, has been a dominant sector and continues to be the main source of income for many. The plantation sector gained prominence toward the latter part of 19th century, with Sri Lanka known for its production and export of tea, rubber, and cinnamon. The free market economy was introduced in the country in 1977. Today, Sri Lanka's major economic sector includes tourism and textiles, while the country's economy has also seen significant contributions from other sectors such as industrial exports and telecommunication. Politically, Sri Lanka was the first country in South Asia to introduce adult suffrage in 1931. Sri Lanka has a multi-party system and is governed by a semi-presidential system consisting of the executive, legislative, and the judiciary. The country is divided into 9 provinces and 25 districts, with each district being administered under a district secretariat. The districts are further subdivided into divisional secretariats and to Gram and Eldari divisions. Sri Lanka is a lower middle income country with a per capita income of US dollars 3,924 in 2015. Sri Lanka's economy has grown at an average of 6.4% between 2010 to 2015, reflecting a peace dividend and determined policy thrust towards reconstruction and growth. Sri Lanka's economy transformed from a previously predominantly rural-based agriculture economy towards a more urbanized economy driven by services. In 2015, the service sector accounted for 62.4% of gross domestic product, followed by manufacturing 28.9% and agriculture 8.7%. The country has comfortably surpassed most of the MDG targets set for 2015. Strong economic growth in the last decade has led to improved shared prosperity and an important decline in poverty. Extreme poverty remains low, and poverty rate fell 0.5 percentage point from 2.4 to 1.9% between 2009 and 10 and 2014 and 15. The real per capita consumption of the bottom 40% increased 2.2% annually between 2006 and 7 and 2014 and 15. And improved living standards are reflected in rising asset ownership, declining shares of food consumption, and a rise in reported household per capita income among the poor. However, moderate poverty remains a challenge. In 2012 and 13, nearly 15% of the population lived on less than $3.10 per day. Pockets of poverty persist in the northeast estate sector and Monragala district, where equality of opportunities in terms of access to services and linkage to the labor market are weaker. As Sri Lanka aspires to become a higher middle income country, it will need to adjust the development model. Growth in the last 5 years is in substantial part due to a peace dividend. Going forward, economic growth will likely require continued structural changes towards greater diversification and productivity increases, and a reduction in the role of agricultural employment from its present share of 1/3 of the population. Although Sri Lanka has excelled in overcoming human development challenges typical to a low-income country, its service delivery systems in education, health, and other areas must now adjust to face new changing demands typical of a middle-income country. To accommodate these increasing demands, the government needs to increase fiscal revenues in the medium term, which at present is low vis-a-vis its own historical standards as well as international standards. Imperatives to improve social safety nets will increase owing to an aging population that has passed its demographic peak. Finally, increasing affluence and information will lead to higher expectations for the state to perform in order to facilitate growth, provide a higher level of services, and demonstrate increasing responsiveness to a more demanding citizenry. Taking awareness of the changing development priorities, the government policy statement presented in early January 2016 and early this year envisioned promoting a globally competitive export-led economy with an emphasis on inclusion. It identified generating 1 million job opportunities, enhancing income levels, development of rural economies, and creating a wide and strong middle class as key policy priorities. The policy statement proposed reducing the fiscal deficit to 3.5% of GDP by 2020. Also, it discussed the reaching reforms with a view to improve performance of the SOE sector and enter the trade and FDI. We in Sri Lanka have learned our lessons the hard way. After years of violent conflict, which has created such a large, diverse, and vibrant Sri Lankan diaspora community across the globe, we know that creating rules developed by legitimate representatives and inclusive institutions and imbued with universal values is essential for peace and stability. Today's multi-power reality is most visible in Asia, and this can be attributed to the lack of a unifying political and security architecture for the Asian region. The question then arises, will the Asian century be defined by contestation or cooperation? And how will Asian powers reconcile multipolarity and multilateralism, a process for which there are no handy 20th century templates? The transatlantic political and economic regimes that were the hub of the liberal international order has no parallel in Asia. Perhaps the most significant policy question for the Asian century is ensuring the realization of human value. How will demographic realities in Asia translate into economic and, by extension, political transformations? The region hosts the youngest as well as the most rapidly aging population in the world, suggesting that demography can both be dividend and a disaster. Growth models of decades past are being rendered obsolete by technological advancements and digitalization. These cripple the notion of a democratic dividend. What are the livelihood avenues available to 21st century Asians? Will unemployment continue to fuel the high-octane nationalist and sub-nationalist movements that Asia is witnessing? Does this detract from the ability of Asian actors to sacrifice and compromise, something that multilateralism demands? Asia needs to think through these pressing questions, and so does the world. After all, the Asian century is not exclusive to Asia. It is as much about the rise of Asia, Asian sectors, and Asian institutions as it is about others who engage with the continent. Challenges and transformations in the region will define not just this continent's century, but that of the planet. I do not think it would be native to say that, like in Sri Lanka, in a very fundamental sense, parties with an interest in the Indian Ocean have a greater convergence of interests than divergence. Interdependence between economies and people is at historically unprecedented heights. There is growing understanding that trade is imperative for development, and there is little appetite for risking an optimistic future to conflict and instability. In addition, there are also very specific instances where interests converge. For example, both India and China have a shared concern with keeping the Hormuz and Red Sea choke points open to free maritime passage. Allow me to conclude by noting that building understanding and confidence is a tremendous task that will require great courage, political will, and perseverance. But we have a useful example in the region in the form of ASEAN. Both South Asian and East Asian countries have a great deal to learn from this example as we navigate the transition in the short, medium, and long terms. And just as Singapore has over the years helped stakeholders come together and work towards their common interest in Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, the gateway to South Asia, which is also fast becoming the hub of the Indian Ocean, and who maintains excellent relations with all relevant stakeholders, too will play a constructive role in promoting dialogue and cooperation for peaceful development in the region. Thank you very much. So you will blame those who are back at home, or you will give me little credit. You decide. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thank you, Field Marshal Fonseca. That was an excellent presentation. Two of the points which recurred again and again in your presentation. One was the benefits of the peace dividend in a country which is at war with itself for a pretty long time, 32 years, 35 years. And the second is the security choices that you have to make once peace is restored and political stability happens. And in Sri Lanka's case, it is choosing between the Indian security architecture or China, which is obviously trying its geoeconomics as an instrument of intruding into a zone that India traditionally considers its own. We'll take 2 or 3 quick questions relating only to Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan internal security, external security considerations, and India-Sri Lanka relations. Thank you. Anybody? Yeah.
Hello, Minister. Can you give us a sense of what is developing at the Hambantota port? Because the signing of a lease for 99 years is impending, and there is a lot of domestic and as well as Indian concern regarding Chinese influence of Hambantota. Can you give us a sense, please?
Hambantota.
We had the harbor at Hambantota, which was not giving us any advantage.
Maybe you want to mic.
Can you hear now? So our harbor at Hambantota, which was constructed at a very heavy cost, and finally we were left indebted to China in a large way. As the new government came after 2015 January, we realized that making those payments back was a big burden on the economy. And the harbor was not giving us any profits. We were not benefiting at all. So we had no alternative other than looking for an investor who will be able to take the harbor on rent or lease or activities and help us, give us a helping hand to cut down on the payment of debts. So finally, with the Chinese company, the government, they were the best bidders, so government had to sign agreement, and decided to give it on lease. But this is mainly only for the commercial purpose. So there will not be any security threat, and I don't think it will not upset even the Indian security sentiments. And at the same time, India should not get worried because we already have plans. There are preparations being done. The projects are being studied for the India also to develop the Trincomalee Harbour, which is supposed to be the deepest harbour in the South Asia. And we have plans to convert Trincomalee Harbour as a naval base and also a commercial base. So that is the situation. The protests and things like that were organized by the disgruntled political elements who has rendered without any recognition presently in the country, who think that they can capitalize on various issues and try to stop the forward march of the government in the field of economy and security.
Thank you so much, General Fonseca, and thank you so much, Kanchan.